pastor to the, got it. I am canon pastor to the English-speaking congregation. We came here 4 years ago, and I served under Archbishop Suhail Dewani for about a year and a half before he retired. And then Archbishop Hassam asked me to continue my services under him. And when he became Archbishop about a year and a half ago, he stepped up from being a coadjutor. He gave me not only the canon pastor role in the cathedral, but also the role of undersecretary of the heads of the churches. And it's really that position from which I know a lot of what's going on here more broadly, because this is the council of 13 officially recognized churches in Jerusalem, headed by the Greek Orthodox Patriarch Theophilus III. And we meet together regularly to discuss matters such as we'll be talking about today. And in fact, this is very timely because we just had last Friday a big briefing for all of the Western Diplomatic Corps in East Jerusalem and some of the South Americans at the Greek Patriarchate that we were able to bring them up to date on all of the goings on and the rise of really some troubling things with respect to the Christian presence and how it's being treated here. So I'd like to share some of that with you. Some of this you may have read in the news over time, but maybe just to bring you up to date, and that is over the past decade or so, there's been a real rise in Jewish religious extremism here in the Holy Land. And you see that, of course, in the recent elections too. And that, of course, is something we can talk about later, but it's just a drift, I think, because of immigration to Israel from people who are of that stripe more and more. And so what used to be a much more liberal society has kind of moved much further to the right over the past decade or so. And how that's played out with respect to the churches is that we have seen a rise in attacks against Christians, attacks against our churches, our cemeteries, and attacks against our property rights and our freedom of worship rights. So let me see if I can flip over to my screen here and show you a few pictures as I talk. I've never done this particular thing here before, so let me see. Okay. So is that coming through? So I'm sure many of you, if you've been on pilgrimage here, have been inside this beautiful Church of All Nations, which is the site of the Garden of Gethsemane. And the rock in front of the altar is where traditionally Jesus is held to have been praying on Maundy Thursday that this cup might pass from him. Now, if you look very closely here, you will see some scorch marks there on that back pew. Can you see that? Thumbs up. Yeah, well, on December 6, 2020, so right in the middle of the pandemic, we had someone come in and try to essentially burn, as much as he could of the inside of that sacred place. Fortunately, the caretaker was able to stop him from doing the worst. He was able to light some segments on fire. They were able to extinguish that quickly. Now, the police did apprehend this man, but the way that it was played up was that he was the crazy man. They referred him to a psychiatrist, and it was never heard from again, which is pretty typical of types of things like this, is that you have maybe a cursory investigation, maybe an arrest for a brief period of time, and then the person is let go. And it's just a sort of repeat cycle. This is the latest of a series of events and attacks against churches, including, if you look at Dormition Abbey in 2014, was burned down. Again, a similar type of thing in the basement there. They tried to burn that church down during Pope Francis's visit that year. You had up at Tagba something that did cause more than $1 million worth of damage at Loaves and Fishes when that area outside of the church where the gift shop was successfully lit on fire and burned down quite extensively. And again, in all of these things and all of the attacks against churches, you see really no forceful action by the police, where if you could imagine that, say, a Palestinian were to do something against a synagogue, you can just imagine what would happen there. It just would not be a similar type of response. You would see probably arrests made, even cursory suspects, and if someone was determined to have damaged the synagogue, you'd never hear from them again, probably be locked away in a dungeon. Nothing like that when there are attacks against Christians or Christian churches. So we have that type of thing that's going on, and it's on the increase. Next, I wanted to talk about property rights. I can get this. There we go. So one of the things that happened about 15 years ago or so was there was a fraudulent sale of two Greek Orthodox properties near Jaffa Gate, the Imperial Hotel and the Petra Hotel. And this resulted, in fact, with the dismissal of the then Patriarch and the appointment and election of Theophilus to deal with this, because there had been some sort of fraudulent giving of power of attorney to a representative who in turn sold the rights to these properties for $1 million to a shell company, which was really a front for the radical group Adorat Kohanim. And so this has been playing out in courts for the last 15 years with this group threatening now through the courts to finally take possession of these two hotels. And I'll talk about one that was taken over here, or at least a portion of it, very recently. So here we are. This is actually pre-pandemic 2019, where you see I'm leading a portion of the prayers with the Patriarch sort of on my shoulder there. Then Dean Hossam opposite, you can see there facing me, Archbishop, then Archbishop Suhail in the purple in the center next to the Custos. So we're praying for successful outcome, that the rights of this building, which really are the entrance to the Christian quarter, might be restored to the church because of these dealings here. The one right next to it is called the Petra Hotel, and a portion of that, in a sort of separate but similar land fraudulent kind of dealing, was taken over forcefully with the help of the police by Adorat Kohanim, and it's under occupation to this day. And interestingly, you see here, we went up and had a prayer service a day or two later with those who are the owners of this section of Little Petra. And you can see the woman there in the middle, her name is Basma Curry, and up until about 2 years ago, she was the head of our school at the Princeton's Basma Center. And she resigned from that position at the time to work some renovations on this property. And no sooner had she begun those renovations a couple months in than this forceful seizure was taken over. So if you just look at the painful looks on all of their faces there, and the Patriarch was, like 2 people away from me when I shot this photograph, you can just see the raw emotion there from this stripping away of this property right at the entrance of the Christian quarter, right as you go down David Street off of the plaza in front of Jaffa Gate. So a very emotional thing, and portending to a larger systematic drive by Adorat Kohanim and others to take over Christian and Muslim portions of the old city, one by one, through any means possible, usually through shell companies, often through fraud. I can speak more specifically about something that we've experienced. We don't have property like that that we've experienced within the old city, but down in the port city of Jaffa, where we've had a church that's been closed since 1948. Opposite that, we have a property that's a very developable property, because it's in a prime area of the city that's now being gentrified. And we had essentially fraudulent attack against that property some 9 years ago. And we had to spend 8 years in court proving that there were forged signatures and this and that, saying that we had sold this property. So, 8 years of litigation, which cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars, some of which we recouped. But even worse was the lost income that we could have gained from this property by developing it. So finally, it went through all of the channels. We got to the Supreme Court and they ruled again in our favor. So that's done. And now we're slowly going through the permitting process so that we can, well, actually the land registration process and then the permitting process for developing that. And through that, that's really held up the reopening of St. Peter's Church across the street, because the monies we would have reaped from the profits from that property would have gone into the repairs needed for that church. Now, thankfully, Father Kevin and Jen, his wife, have been there now for over a year, and they've nurtured a beautiful little congregation from the expatriate members of the community there, and they're meeting inside a Lutheran church for the time being. But they'd like to, of course, move into St. Peter's Church and have their own facilities and so forth. But this has taken a toll in terms of that church reopening, and so this is a real way that the Anglican Church here has been affected by that whole move of litigation against Christian property. So that's threats against church properties, and it's happening on all different levels. Governmentally, we have coming up, keeps being pushed back to a time when they think nobody will be looking. Now it's supposed to be right after Christmas. Municipality hearing that would make all of the Mount of Olives, Kidron Valley, and portions of the Kinnan Valley a national park. And as a Bedouin like to say, that would be the camel getting his nose into the tent. And once the camel gets the nose into the tent, soon the camel is in the middle of the tent. Essentially, anything that the churches would want to do would have to go through their rulings, and it's just a way for the city to get a foothold into church properties. So we will be fighting that and ask your prayers that that does not happen. So then I want to go on and talk about freedom of worship. So this is something many of you may have seen the posts I had back around Holy Fire. For those of you who don't know what Holy Fire is, it's the most sacred day in the Orthodox liturgical calendar. It's the day when all of the Orthodox and other pilgrims go into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre through a procession. And the entourage processes 3 times around the Aedicule. And then the Patriarch, assisted by a representative from the Armenians, goes inside the tomb of Christ, is sealed in, and a fire erupts from the tomb. And the candles are essentially lit all around the church. Runners take versions of their lights from the torch, and they go off to the airports, and these lights go on to light churches in Greece, in Armenia, in much of the Orthodox world, Russia. It's literally thousands of churches in the Eastern Orthodox world. So anyway, this has been going on for more than 1,600 years. And this year, about 2 weeks before the event was to happen, the police talked to both the Greek Patriarch and the Armenian Patriarch, and also the Custos, who has, they're the principals on Holy Sepulchre, and just summarily announced that they were going to limit the attendance of this service to 1,000 people, which is about 1/10 of what it can hold. So a 90% reduction essentially for worship there. Moreover, they were only going to let 500 people into the old city from the outside. So this was happening at the same time that literally tens of thousands of Jewish worshipers were coming for Passover services at the wall, and for Muslims on the Haram for Ramadan. And of course, we know there were problems there, and we decry those as well. But here, just dumped on us was this decision that there's going to be this reduction. So I was able to go this year and escort some diplomats from the European nations. And I took some pictures along the way and some videos. And here you see we and many other worshipers trying to get through the barricades. Since we had passes and diplomats, we were able to eventually get through. Many were not. And as you got into the old city, it's like every corner, there was a police barricade. We had to talk our way through that. We even got down to the Greek Patriarchate, because that's normally how you would get into Holy Sepulchre. But they had police on private property there, essentially blocking the way of worshipers, even from the Patriarchate. And we eventually found a route in and did get inside. But even inside the Holy Sepulchre, you can see there were police barricading areas of the church there that could have been occupied by worshipers. They were not, because they were being forbidden. And as they gathered us in the Greek area of worship as sort of our holding area for it, Diane Corner, who is the British Consul General, looked up there and saw in the prime places right above the aedicule itself, Israeli diplomats guarded by police, essentially being given the prime spots in front of the service, while at the same time, literally thousands of worshipers who are members of the Greek Orthodox churches were denied access to their own worship service. So Diane was beside herself. She's very feisty when she gets this type of thing happening in front of her, and so she issued a report back to her government. And I talked about this with the diplomats on Friday, and here you can see this is not from Friday, but someone shot this picture of me with a briefing I gave to some diplomats at the Imperial Hotel next to the Patriarch. And then from Friday, here's a shot I took of Archbishop Osam with the Custos and the Patriarch. And then also Bishop Azar from the Lutheran Church is next to him. He's off camera, speaking to about 40 diplomats and giving him this similar type of briefing. Patriarch turned to me and asked me to speak at the end. So I shared the story about holy fire. And Patriarch is always very diplomatic, saying, what we are looking at is the radicals. It's, they who are the problem. And I very boldly took exception to that. I said to the diplomats, I said, the Patriarch needs to be diplomatic, but here's how I see it. I see freedom of movement, non-investigation of things are things that the government is not doing. And I referred back to a documentary I had seen some time ago about the Sheikh Jarrah situation there. And one of the Jewish, not settlers, but supporters of the Muslims in Sheikh Jarrah who were being evicted was asked whom he blamed for this problem. And he says, I don't blame the settlers for trying to get in here. He said, every country has its crazy people, but it's the government's job to stop the crazy people. So I blame the government because they are not doing their job in stopping the crazy people. And that's pretty much the situation here. We need the government to respect human rights, including the right of people to worship in their own places of worship, to protect property rights for Christians, to protect attacks which are being made against Christians more and more. I didn't talk about that so much, but it is on the rise as well. Ask the Armenians in the Armenian Quarter. They're the biggest victims of that because a lot of Jews come through their quarter on the way to the wall. So all these things are happening. They're on the rise because Israel is not doing what governments are supposed to do, and that is to make sure that everybody has the same rights as the other. And we're seeing, as famously said, in Animal Farm, some animals are more equal than others. So with that, maybe I'll hand it off to my wife and she can talk maybe a little bit more about an experience that we've both had together. She's not really been involved in this Heads of the Churches stuff, but we have done something out with Tent of Nations.
Maybe some of you are familiar with Tent of Nations, the Nasser farm that's just southwest of Bethlehem. This place is really dear to us, and the owners, Daoud and Daher, and their families are just wonderful people. They are Christian Lutherans who bought the farm from the Ottoman Empire. So it's about 106 years old, I think. It's also called Daher's Vineyard. And they do have extensive plantings of olive trees, grapes, almonds, lots of things to harvest. They're on a hilltop, and they are surrounded by illegal Israeli settlements. About 30 years ago, their land was determined by the Israeli government to be state land. And so they have been in court trying to register their land after multiple times of showing documents that everything's in order, and that isn't disputed, but they do need to re-register their land, and the court date keeps getting postponed. So they have, I am so frustrated for them, but that's not really my place to say, I guess. They are just examples of people that have incredible Christian values. One of their tenets, one of their sayings is, we refuse to be enemies and we refuse to be victims. And they really do. They're really lovely, lovely people, but they're also incredibly resilient. And they're not backing down or giving in. And the Israeli government blocked the road to their farm so that you have to park way out, so water trucks cannot get in. They blocked their electricity. They have no electricity except what they generate through solar panels that were given to them by the Germans, a German NGO, I think. I'm not really sure. Yeah. And they were cited for having an illegal cistern. They collect rainwater. That's how they survive with water. And their farm's purpose is to build bridges between people and their land. And so they host thousands of people who come to help them harvest, to learn about their struggle, to learn about Palestine. They have a summer camp that hosts about 50 kids to try to connect the Palestinian kids to the land. I think they had like 1,900 visitors in 2019. Is that correct? Let's see, 1,300. A substantial amount of people have come through and heard their story. And they really are lights in their community. But they have suffered. They've suffered incredible arson. They had 1,800 trees burned. And according to Daoud, that incident took place. The Israeli firefighters came and they didn't even enter the property.
They just made sure that the settlement next to it didn't start on fire.
Yeah,
It just stood there.
Yeah, it was really awful. Lately, we were supposed to go harvest grapes a few weeks ago. All their grapes were stolen. And I think worst of all is that they were actually attacked. Daher and Daoud were out feeding chickens, and in May, I think, January. It's January 28th. They were attacked by a huge group of men with sticks and iron bars and put into the hospital in critical condition. They have made a recovery from that, but that's just an example of things that happen on their farm, and it's theirs. It really is theirs. They were offered once a blank check, and they said selling the farm would be like selling our mother. So they are a steadfast presence in that area, and they're really inspiring to lots of people. We went and picked olives there a few weeks ago. They're just, we're very, very fond of them, and we pray for them and hope you will too.
Okay, let me switch over so you can see us again. Stop share.
Stop share. There you go.
Okay. So I think we'll stop talking there. I think we've gone maybe a little bit further than the 20 minutes, but I hope you found some of that new information and informative, and that you have some maybe questions that you want to ask us from it.
No, I think the timing is very good, looking at how we're going. So because we are this number, not hundreds, people can ask their own questions. You don't need to put them in the chat. just unmute yourself. And are there any questions? First of all, thank you for what you have given us. And it's not that we want more and more, but anyone who would like to ask a question at this stage, now is the time. Well, I've got one, and then as others gather their thoughts, I'm just wondering how much all of what you've described was a surprise to you, dare I say, a shock. Like, what is the media in America, like church and secular media, what picture is being given of the situation in the Holy Land, in Palestine, Israel? What did you know? Were you shocked?
Right. I think because I had been here, off and on in many, lengths of time since 1988, it really came as little surprise to me. I think maybe the more specific attacks against the Christians here was something that was a little more surprising, that it was, focused against them. Of course, it's part of the larger tension between Jews and Palestinians overall. But the fact that Christians specifically were being targeted for their beliefs here, and that the government was not doing much about it. I think that was a huge disappointment for me, maybe not totally unexpected given recent governments here, but nevertheless, it was a disappointment. One thing I didn't mention, actually, another thing that happened to us was in the West Bank is one of our own churches was attacked over the summer, St. Andrew's in Ramallah. Almost since its founding in the 70s, there's an NGO, a human rights NGO called Al-Haq, which means the truth in Arabic. And they have set about documenting abuses in the West Bank, human rights abuses from both sides. They actually go after Palestinian government too. So they're kind of equal opportunists on this, which Abbas doesn't really like, but oh well. Anyway, so they and I think 5 other NGOs were summarily called terrorist groups by the Israelis over the summer. No one has really accepted that, and the Israelis have provided no proof that they're fronts, and everybody in the world pretty much knows that Israel just doesn't like anyone looking over their shoulder in the West Bank, like these folks have been doing, and like EEPPI as well. So we had the in the middle of the night, like 3 in the morning or something, IDF soldiers just you get it, IDF soldiers burst into the church complex unannounced, blasted through the door until Hack went into the church as well, kicked in the door there, and just had this big violation of church property when it could have been handled much more graciously and gracefully. So we, of course, made a big protest about that. We never received an apology directly because Israel just doesn't do things like that. But it's just another example of the Israeli government showing a huge disrespect for churches and church ceremonies and so forth. So that's something that directly affected us with respect to one of our properties by the Israeli government in the West Bank.
And I think I was really surprised and didn't really know about the detention of children. This is something you mentioned, Shadi. He's actually related to someone who works in our diocesan office. We hear it all the time, and it's heartbreaking. It's unbelievable. What's the Palestinian media actually calls it kidnapping, which I think is a very interesting way to look at it, and not terribly inaccurate. Children are taken from their homes in front of their parents. They're not given counsel. They're not given medical attention. They're beaten. They're taken out barefoot, blindfolded. Their places are ransacked. But I can't imagine as a parent what that must be like, and certainly what it must be like for these teenage kids. That was surprising to me, how often it happens.
Yeah, and that's very common in the West Bank, but this thing with Shadi, he wasn't the only one taken. It was, a bunch of kids, because, some kids had thrown rocks at a Jewish car or something in Beth Hanina, which is an Arab suburb of Jerusalem. And they just sort of rounded up who they thought, might have been the suspects, anyone who was of a certain demographic, and hauled them off. They have no evidence. It was these
They're not even
specific kids,
charged
and they're
yet.
not even charged officially.
Yeah.
This is just a sort of collective punishment, against the community there, terrorizing their children. And so, Shadi just happens to be, I think, one of the few Christians in there. His grandmother, co-founder Sabeel. So he gets more attention, but there's a lot more, just like with Leanne last year, from Verse 8. She was one of dozens who were apprehended just for being, involved in student discussions of the problem. They don't want any discussion of the problem. There is no problem.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so it's freedom of expression there. But that's, we identify and support the Christians there and all of those around them. But it is, of course, within the larger context of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. So.
Thank you. Stuart has a question on the chat and another comment, and I will come back to your comment shortly, Stuart. But taking up your question to Don and Chris, what would you like churches in Australia to do to assist? Like, give us a message, throw out to us a message that we here can then take both within Pien's work and within our own churches, and in your sister church, for instance, and more widely, your message to us. What would you like the churches to do and know?
Well, I think, first of all, pray for us. We need your prayers and support. I didn't talk about the demographics at all, but you probably know this already. Whereas 100 years ago, Christians were 20% of the population, that has dwindled now to less than 2%. In raw numbers, it's increased, but we've skyrocketed up into close to 10 million west of the Jordan River, and so about 180,000 Christians within there, most in Galilee actually, and it's dwindling. We need your prayers for us to find a way to push on amidst all these adversities. Of course, Chris and I are here just in a supportive role. It's hard for us to imagine what it's like to, be in the West Bank as a Christian, to be even an Israeli citizen or in East Jerusalem, and to go through all the difficulties they have with their official status. So pray for us. Secondly, I'd say educate.
Yes.
Let people know these things are going on. And I think our center of gravity within the heads of the Churches Council is to talk about this with respect to our population. We, of course, contextualize it within the larger conflict, but we have a better standing to talk about Christians. And I think strategically that's a better move anyway, because Palestinians have been vilified, and Arabs in general have been vilified for the last century or so, and associated with Islam, which is also Islamophobia connected with it. But when you talk about Christians being persecuted, that's something people in the Western world especially can grab a handle onto. These are people like me. And if you lead with Christians and they begin understanding, oh, they're Arab Christians, you really are Arab Christians. Tell me about that.
Some Palestinians are Christian.
Yes.
Comes as a surprise.
Oh, yes, they've been here since Pentecost, and yes, Petra and the Spice Cities, they were all Arab Christian cities, for hundreds of years, and even after the Muslim invasions. It's really only till the 13th century they went into the minority. So educate, let them know these things are going on. Let them know that the challenges that the Christian presence has here, with lack of opportunity, the persecutions, the oppression they face. And then thirdly, advocate. Let your representatives know what's going on. And when you see human rights abuses that we try to publicize here, specifically like Shadi right now, Tent of Nations right now, speak up for us. One of the things I've been able to do for the Nassers at Tent of Nations is I have a connection fairly close with the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so twice now, he has advocated for, on his social media accounts, Twitter and Facebook and all of that, for the Nassers, one in advance of his court date. And then they shared one of my Facebook posts around the time of the stabbings back in January. So, and I, have promised Daoud I would continue to do that. And so we are able to have that level of advocacy from the Archbishop of Canterbury. If you can do that for us in Australia, that would be wonderful to, just get the additional pressure from all around the world. So those three things: prayer, education, and advocacy would be the three things.
And I'd just like to add one sort of personal note. So I'm working with the Sunday school kids at St. George's Cathedral, and I'm so aware of how important it is for churches to be teaching biblical truth about Israel. I don't want to get too political or inappropriate, but I would say that Christian Zionism, you need to have an answer for it, and your clergy need to equip their people. And I can't say that strongly enough. You have got to research it as clergy, and you have got to have an answer for people that are saying, that are seeing only the Israeli side, who constantly use the Bible as a weapon. And I really feel strongly about this, but I think that there are so many lay people, speaking as a lay person, who don't have that information. I am still learning. We're all still learning, but to be able to say, to be able to get into the heart of the conflict from a Christian perspective, and to be able to hear multiple perspectives, to learn peacemaking skills, to learn these things, to learn how to listen to each other. This is a Christian value that cuts through all Christians, and we need to learn that from our clergy. We need to be shepherded this way. So I really feel strongly that the clergy have that responsibility.
Yeah, I agree. I think, even within the Anglican Church, we need to reread Galatians and Romans and Hebrews in our churches and see, who the people of Israel are. It's a much bigger tent than is being made out to be by this narrow Christian Zionism, which is almost sort of digressing back into Seventh-day Adventism in a way. So, and I know portions of Australia, and especially on the Sydney side, tend to drift in that direction, just from what I've perused in my interactions with them. So,
thank you. Now, Nell has a question, and we'll make that the last one.
okay.
So, Nell, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Just a question in relation to the sister church idea. We talked about this a while ago in Pien about trying to establish some more sister churches with Australian churches and churches throughout the West Bank and in Gaza and in Galilee, so that there can be a deeper level of communication and more personal kind of communication happening between Christians there and Christians here. And I'm just wondering how you see that, if it could happen or not. We'd have to find people who could communicate in English primarily. Yeah, I'm just wondering if you think it's a worthwhile thing for us to pursue with your own church. Do you put out resources, or is there information that you could perhaps regularly feed to us so we could share with our network here?
Yeah, I mean, the usual procedure on that is we we have sort of that inquiry directed to us often at the diocesan office, and and we just sort of look at what is the parish, what is the institution that you're coming from. Are you say a school, a Christian school maybe that would like to be paired with one of our schools because we have a dozen of them, and we have done that in the past. Or if you're a church, of a specific stripe that maybe you're evangelical in orientation. Well, we've got a couple evangelical churches here actually that are
Wonderful.
Kusar Yasif, Rainey, they have praise bands and the whole 9 yards. We can partner you with them. Or if you're a high church, then maybe with St. George's Cathedral. Or even with St. Peter's Jaffa, if you're at St. Peter's and want to help a new and young church reestablish itself after 75 years, supporting them that way. All kinds of possibilities there. It just depends on the type of relationship you're looking for, and we can guide you through that. And then we usually pass it on to the heads of the institution or the rector of the parish to take it from there. So just let us know how that you might want that to play out.
We also have a couple of resources. I don't know if you're aware, in order to help people maybe feel more connected to Jerusalem. The dean of the college, Richard Sewell, has written a beautiful devotional called River, what's it called? I can't remember, sorry. We could get that to you though. It's where he talks about the land and has a Lenten devotional. It even has little QR codes that you can get a video in the book. You can get a video on your computer about that from the place that he's talking about. Don has also written a book on the gates of Jerusalem, when it's a devotional, and that raises money for the college also. But just little ways to connect to this place.
Yeah, unfortunately, you have to come here to buy that one because it's not released anywhere else. So that's another thing. It could be a fourth one, is really pilgrimage.
Yeah.
Because the more people come here and connect not just with the ancient stones, but the living stones, the more that they understand the complexities of the situation here and be connected to it. So yeah. We have
Thank you.
Maoris here, not from Australia, of course, from New Zealand, but it's good to have them back after 3 years from down under. So you're rough part of the world.
We will draw this section of the meeting to a close, and thank you indeed, Chris and Don. And Don, I know you're not particularly well, having returned from your work visit with Archbishop Sam, and thank you for joining with us tonight regardless. So we can't say it enough. We do a Zoom clap where everyone mute or not.
Thank you.
Okay, so
And let me just say
thank
too,
you.
if you are a social media Facebook person,
yes,
if you haven't sent me a friend request, I frequently, and Chris too, we frequently put things out
yes,
about the situation here, and I do archaeology as well, so you get a little bit of everything, the pilgrim experience. So that's another way to stay connected personally with us. So
indeed.
okay.
Thank you.